If you were to start a new business, what would it be? Maybe you could run a coffee van, providing customers with their much-needed caffeine for the day. Or an animal shelter, or some kind of charity. Whether you're starting a new business or growing one, if you want it to be successful, you need the most talented people on your team. That's where ZipRecruiter comes in. And right now you can try it for free at ziprecruiter.com/casefile. Why should you let ZipRecruiter help you hire for your business? ZipRecruiter's powerful matching technology finds highly qualified candidates for a wide range of roles. Got your eye on one or two people who'd be perfect for your job? ZipRecruiter lets you send them a personal invite, so they're more likely to apply. ZipRecruiter also offers attention-grabbing labels that speak to job flexibility, keywords like remote, training provided, urgent, and more to really help your job stand out. Let ZipRecruiter fill all your roles with the right candidates. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. See for yourself. Go to this exclusive web address to try ZipRecruiter for free. ziprecruiter.com/casefile. Again, that's ziprecruiter.com/casefile. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. During the winter of 1993, the Melbourne suburb of Frankston was terrorised by a vicious serial killer named Paul Daniel. 3 decades later, Daniel has applied for parole. To coincide with Daniel's bid for parole, Casefile Presents is launching a long-form series about the case as a reminder that Daniel must never be released. Researched, written and hosted by award-winning crime writer Vicky Petradis, the Frankston Murders podcast uncovers new material and new victims stalked by Daniel in the lead-up to the killings. All 11 episodes of the Frankston Murders are available to listen to right now. Be sure to follow the Frankston Murders wherever you get your podcasts. Stay tuned until the end of today's episode to hear the trailer, and be sure to follow the Frankston Murders wherever you get your podcasts. Our episodes deal with serious and often distressing incidents. If you feel at any time you need support, please contact your local crisis centre. For suggested phone numbers for confidential support, please see the show notes for this episode on your app or on our website. "34-year-old Sherri Papini knew the lyrics to Everything by pop singer Michael Bublé well. Not only had she chosen it as her wedding song when marrying the love of her life, Keith, it was also a great pacekeeper when exercising. In November 2016, the Californian mother of 2 had almost fully healed from a recent breast augmentation procedure. Finally feeling well enough to start jogging again, Sherri had started training for an upcoming 5K race. Still a bit rusty, she was using an app to track her progress. Wednesday, November 2 was a clear day. With her 2 young children in daycare and her husband at work, Sherri got dressed in black leggings, a pink Nike hoodie, and checkered tennis shoes. She headed outside. The Papini family lived in Redding, a small city in Northern California. Their home in the rural Mountain Gate area was surrounded by flat tree-lined roads and wide open spaces that provided a pleasant backdrop for a run. Sherri connected her earbuds to her iPhone and opened her fitness app. She pressed play on her wedding song and started jogging down her driveway. Later that evening, an emergency services operator received a call from Sherri's husband, Keith Papini. He'd just returned home from work and said he was freaking out because his wife wasn't there. Officers from the Shasta County Sheriff's Office quickly arrived at the couple's home. Keith explained that it was just after 5 p.m. when he pulled into the driveway of his family's two-story home. It was the same house that Keith himself had been raised in. With its sprawling backyard, leafy surrounds, and a basketball ring in the driveway, it was the ideal place to raise a family. Keith approached the front door, prepared for the usual warm welcome from his boisterous 4-year-old son and 2-year-old daughter. But as he stepped inside, it was oddly quiet. Sherri Papini typically kept the family on a tight schedule and always let her husband know if anything unexpected had arisen. But Keith said the last he'd heard from Sherri was around 11 a.m. when she texted asking if he was going to be home for lunch. It had been a busy day for Keith, who worked at a Best Buy electronics store, and he'd responded that he wouldn't be able to make it. Keith walked through their home. Everything appeared as normal, except for a half-wrapped present addressed to him from Sherri and the kids. Inside was a handmade American flag pillow. Keith looked outside. Sherri's car was in the driveway, but there was no sign of her or the kids anywhere. He sent Sherri a text, but there was no response. He called the children's daycare provider and asked what time Sherri had stopped by. The daycare worker was taken aback. Sherri hadn't picked the kids up. They were still there. Keith's initial confusion quickly turned to concern. He logged in to his Find My iPhone app, which was also configured to recognize the location of his wife's device. The icon confirmed that Sherri's phone was located less than 1 mile away, at the corner of Old Oregon Trail and Sunrise Drive. Thinking Sherri might have gone for a walk, Keith drove to the specified location. There was no one there. He called his mother to see if she had spoken to Sherri. She hadn't. Keith tried to remain calm. He told himself that Sherri might have accidentally left her phone on the roof of her car and it had fallen off during the drive. But that didn't explain why she hadn't picked up their kids. Sherri was an incredibly dedicated mother who doted on her children, and it was completely out of character for her to leave them in daycare this late. Nor did she have any health conditions that could explain a sudden absence. Keith got out of the car and started looking around. The intersection housed all the letterboxes for the neighbourhood, and it was just 1.5 miles from the nearest highway. Other than that, it was fairly remote. No houses were in the immediate vicinity, and traffic wasn't busy. Just off the road, Keith found Sherri's iPhone in the grass. It had a crack on the front screen, but was still functioning. Sherri's headphones were still connected, and Michael Bublé's Everything was playing on repeat. Wrapped around the headphones were several strands of long blonde hair, the same colour and length as Sherri's. Officers visited the location where Sherri's phone was found. They found no signs that a struggle had taken place. Similarly, a search of the Papini's home revealed that everything was in order and nothing appeared to have been stolen. But there was no evidence to support the possibility that Sherri had taken off voluntarily. Her purse and belongings were all accounted for, and she hadn't made any significant withdrawals from her bank account. Police questioned whether Sherri could have run away to start afresh elsewhere. Keith vehemently denied this possibility. He had known Sherri since middle school. The two had shared a kiss as teenagers, but it wasn't until years later that they reconnected and a romance blossomed. Keith was immediately smitten with Sherri, a bubbly, blue-eyed blonde with a luminous smile. They married in 2009, and Sherri soon left her job as a telecommunications account executive to be a stay-at-home mum. It was a position she thrived in. Sherri organised all kinds of projects and activities for her children while also being a doting wife and homemaker. She put great care and attention into everything she did, be it decorating a homemade pie, planning a birthday party for her children, or maintaining her physical appearance. According to Keith, the couple had a very happy marriage. They fought occasionally, but no more than any other couple. Their last argument had been a month prior over something as trivial as a messy room. Keith said there was no way that Sherri would ever voluntarily leave her children. It was a sentiment shared by others, who described Sherri Papini as a super mum. In the lead-up to her disappearance, everything had been completely normal. Sherri had given no indication that she was making plans to leave or wanted to escape her responsibilities. She had recently taken her children out trick-or-treating for Halloween and was already planning what to cook for an upcoming Thanksgiving dinner. A background check revealed no known history of domestic abuse or any police call-outs to the Papini's property. In fact, Keith's record was squeaky clean. Still, police had to consider the possibility that Keith was involved with his wife's disappearance. What if he had killed her and then staged a kidnapping to deflect attention from himself? Police looked into Keith's movements from Wednesday, November 2, and confirmed that he was at work all day. The last reported sighting of Sherri Papini occurred around 2 p.m. when a neighbour saw her jogging. There had been no suspicious vehicles sighted in the area, nor had anyone heard cries for help. Sherri was considered to be an alert, aware person. Had someone approached her, Sherri's loved ones believed she would have put up a fight. It therefore seemed more likely that whoever took her had snuck up unsuspectingly. Either that, or more than one person was involved. A team searched overnight, covering a half-mile radius from the corner of Old Oregon Trail and Sunrise Drive where Sherri's phone was found. An aerial search was also conducted, but nothing of interest was found. The discarded iPhone was the only clue police had to go by. The following day, Sherri's sister-in-law Suzanne discussed its significance in the press, saying that while it was good to have some sort of clue, it indicated that Sherri had been taken. Suzanne said, "She wouldn't just drop her phone if she was running away. At least it's giving us some kind of information, but we're sick. This is a pretty sickening situation." The Redding community was in shock. Sherri had no known enemies. Keith Papini said there had been no strange activity, such as suspicious calls or emails, in the lead-up to his wife's disappearance. So who would abduct an innocent mother of two so brazenly in broad daylight, just 1 mile from her home? The Mountain Gate area was considered a safe place to live, but like any other town, Redding had skeletons in its closet. Back in August 1998, 16-year-old Tara Smith set out for a jog down Old Oregon Trail and was never seen again. While Tara's case remained unsolved, the people of Redding had never forgotten it. Some were quick to point out an eerie coincidence. Tara Smith and Sherri Papini had attended the same high school at the same time. They also shared a similar look, with some noting they could easily pass for sisters. Although the pair weren't known to be friends, and despite 18 years passing between the two disappearances, it did spark some questions. Was it possible the same perpetrator had struck again? 4 known sex offenders lived within 1 mile of the location where Sherri's phone was found. 50 more lived in the 5 miles beyond. Police began looking into each individual, but one by one, they were all ruled out. Meanwhile, Keith Papini agreed to participate in a polygraph test. It concluded he was telling the truth when he said he wasn't involved in his wife's disappearance. This, along with Keith's confirmed alibi and the lack of physical evidence linking him to the crime scene, gave police the confidence to conclusively rule him out as a suspect. Being publicly cleared provided Keith with little relief. He told People magazine, "That is not where my head has been this whole time. My head has been trying to find my wife." Police continue to explore all avenues, including the possibility that Sherri might have voluntarily run away. But as the days passed with no breakthroughs, local residents became consumed by fear. They rallied behind the Papini family, setting up a GoFundMe account to help with expenses. Missing person posters were plastered around town, urging people to be on the lookout for the 34-year-old. At a fence on the corner of Old Oregon Trail and Sunrise Drive, concerned citizens hung a bunch of helium balloons with the words "Bring Sherri Home" written on them. A $50,000 reward for information was announced. The Papini family hired a private investigator who began working on the possibility that Sherri had been abducted as part of a human trafficking ring. The Papini's house was only a few miles from the Interstate 5 freeway, an area known to be used for criminal activity by Mexican cartels. A trailer near their house was also a known drug den. Maybe someone frequenting the trailer had spotted Sherri and recognised her as an easy target. Police were quick to dispel this theory. Victims of sex trafficking are typically young and childless, but as others argued, Sherri looked notably young for her age. At 5 foot 3 inches tall, with a petite 105-pound frame and long blonde hair, some believed Sherri could pass for 18. Had she been targeted at random, it was possible the perpetrator had mistaken her for a much younger woman. By November 17, Sherri Papini had been missing for 15 days. The FBI became involved as the local rumour mill swung into overdrive. Some theorised that Sherri could have been taken by a stalker. What if someone had been watching her movements closely and knew exactly when she'd be alone on the remote running trail? There was also talk of a possible affair. Some speculated that Sherri could have been involved with a married man whose scorned lover had abducted her as part of a revenge plot. Despite Keith Papini being publicly cleared, many members of the public continued to cast suspicion on him. Keith Papini did his best to hold it together for the sake of his young children. He held on to hopes that Sherri was still alive and being held somewhere. Making a teary appeal to his wife on television, Keith said, "If Sherri is listening, I want to say that we are trying. We're trying the best we can, and I'm so sorry that I'm not there. I love you." Addressing the perpetrator directly, Keith told People magazine, "I just want her back, and I want her back safe. Just bring her home. Please bring her back. The sooner the better." A wealthy businessman was passing through Redding when he learned of Sherri's disappearance and heard Keith's heartfelt pleas for her safe return. Something about the case struck a chord with the man. Even though he didn't know Sherri or the Papini family, the pain they were experiencing seemed unimaginable. He began thinking about ways that he could help out. That's when the idea struck him. what about a reverse ransom? After reaching out to Keith Papini and getting the go-ahead, the businessman, who chose to remain anonymous, created a website titled sherrypapini.com. He made a bizarre offer to whoever had abducted Sherri: return her safely and receive an undisclosed six-figure reward with no questions asked. The donor wrote, "I am willing to pay you in whatever way you can creatively think about, where you feel safe and where nothing can be tracked to you. I will not communicate with the police and sheriff's department regarding any details about this offer." Law enforcement were firmly against this tactic for several reasons. For one, there still wasn't enough evidence to unequivocally confirm that Sherri Papini had been abducted. If she had, her kidnapper had made no attempt to demand any kind of ransom. 2. Releasing an offer like this left the Papini family vulnerable to scam artists. And thirdly, financially rewarding someone for their criminal activity only served to encourage future copycats. The anonymous donor was undeterred. He hired an independent hostage negotiator named Cameron Gamble to act as his spokesman and gave a deadline of 100 hours, writing on his website, "Once I leave town, this offer is off the table." Public reaction to the offer was mixed. Some viewed it as a novel way to help solve missing person cases. Skeptics believed it was nothing more than a publicity stunt for Cameron Gamble to promote his hostage negotiation business. Either way, the 100-hour deadline came and went without anyone coming forward. The donor withdrew the controversial reverse ransom offer, but said the unclaimed money would be added towards the existing $50,000 reward offered by law enforcement. By November 23, Sherri Papini had been missing for 3 weeks. Investigators had chased over 400 leads and executed 20 search warrants to obtain data relating to cell phone records, social media accounts, banking information, and emails. A check of Sherri Papini's cell phone revealed she had recently deleted a text message exchange with a female contact. But when police looked into this contact, they realised it wasn't a woman at all. Sherri had been conversing with a man from Michigan named Donovan, but had hidden his number under a woman's name. The two had been texting between October 29 and November 1, the day before Sherri went missing. Donovan had been in San Francisco for a work conference, and the two discussed the possibility of meeting up in Redding. However, it was a 5-hour drive between the two cities, which Donovan deemed too far. Their rendezvous didn't eventuate, but for investigators, this was a solid lead. What if Donovan had decided to swing by Redding after all? They obtained Donovan's travel records and confirmed that he had returned to Michigan on November 2, the day of Sherri's disappearance. Investigators flew to Michigan to visit Donovan's apartment while he was at work. They searched the premises but found no sign of Sherri Papini or anything else incriminating. When police arrived at Donovan's work for an interview, he seemed shocked. According to Donovan, he had met Sherri Papini in 2011 when she was in Michigan for a work trip. He later told the Sacramento Bee that he found her to be, quote, drop-dead gorgeous. Donovan said there was something pretty magical about her. Sherri made no mention of the fact that she was married and the two had spent the weekend together. Over the years, they continued to send the occasional flirty message, but it never went beyond that. Donovan assumed the recent contact from Sherri was due to her seeing his social media post about being in San Francisco. Donovan denied being anywhere near Redding on the day Sherri went missing. He had data on his cell phone to prove he was in San Francisco at the time, and others were able to confirm his alibi. For investigators, this was a major blow. It was back to the drawing board. Thursday, November 24, was Thanksgiving Day. What was typically a day of celebration for the Papini family was now a stark reminder that 22 days had passed with no sign of Sherri. Before her disappearance, she'd been enthusiastically making plans with her in-laws about the day. She'd intended on making sweet potatoes, her children's favourite. Instead, members of the Redding community planned to gather later in the afternoon to show support for Sherri's loved ones. Keith Papini got up before dawn to begin his day. He was in the bathroom shaving when his phone rang. On the other line was one of the detectives working on his wife's case. They finally had news. Sherri Papini had been found. Casefile will be back shortly. Thank you for supporting us by listening to this episode's sponsors. We are currently in a challenging economic climate and we don't know what the future holds. So when it comes to saving money as a small business owner, every little bit helps. And with ShipStation, you can save money without cutting corners. ShipStation gives you access to discounts of up to 84% off USPS and UPS rates, and you can manage every order from one simple-to-use dashboard. When you lower your shipping costs and make returns easy, your customers stay happy and you save money. And ShipStation is now available in the UK, Australia, and Canada. Casefile team member Paulina runs a Shopify store and used ShipStation's free trial before signing up. She tells me she can't imagine life without ShipStation now. She's saved money and has more time to do what she loves. ShipStation effortlessly integrates everywhere you sell online, including Amazon, Etsy, eBay, Shopify, and more. Over 130,000 companies have grown their e-commerce business with ShipStation. And 98% of companies that stick with ShipStation for a year become customers for life. Worry less about the bottom line when you save money with ShipStation. Go to shipstation.com and use code CASEFILE today and sign up for your free 60-day trial. That's shipstation.com, code CASEFILE. Trends and fads come and go, especially when it comes to health and wellness. Diets like intermittent fasting, low-carb, high-fat, and detox juices have all had their spotlight as the best for weight loss and wellness. Noom is not a fad. They use psychology, not trends, to help you make sustainable choices that are aligned with your values and weight loss goals. Whatever your health goals are, the flexible program focuses on progress instead of perfection. Choose your level of support, from 5-minute daily check-ins to personal coaching. Casefile team member Jess tells me that it was the online coach who really helped her achieve her weight loss goals. She says just knowing she had someone to chat with who had her back was invaluable. Combined with short lessons and healthy recipes on the Noom app, Jess says she had everything she needed to lose weight and stay fit. Stop chasing health trends and build sustainable, healthy habits with Noom's psychology-based approach. Sign up for your trial today at noom.com/casefile. That's noom.com/casefile to sign up for your trial today. Check out Noom's first ever book, The Noom Mindset, a deep dive into the psychology of behaviour change. Available to buy now wherever books are sold. Thank you for listening to this episode's ads. By supporting our sponsors, you support Casefile to continue to deliver quality content. By 4:30 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning, traffic was already busy on the Interstate 5 highway in Yolo County, a rural area 140 miles south of Redding. As motorists made their way to celebrate the holiday with friends and family, several passers-by noticed something strange on the side of the road. Through the darkness, a panicked-looking woman was frantically waving a piece of fabric in the air as though trying to attract attention. Unsure what to make of it, many continued onwards. One woman pulled over a little further down the highway to call 911, while the truck driver pulled over and addressed the woman directly. In a state of distress, she told him her name was Sherri Papini and that she needed an ambulance. She was covered in bruises and said that her vision was blurry. Around her waist was a metal chain. First responders arrived promptly and were shocked by what they saw. The woman who stood before them was a severe contrast to the vibrant, smiling face that had been plastered on posters and news bulletins. Sherri Papini was dressed in dirty grey sweatpants, a sweatshirt and socks. Her waist-length blonde hair had been crudely hacked to her shoulders, and she looked emaciated. She was disoriented, having no idea where she was or what day it was. There were restraints around her ankles and zip ties around her wrists, one of which was tethered to the chain around her waist. It was only upon being transferred to a nearby hospital that the full extent of Sherri's injuries became clear. Her body was covered in bruises in various states of healing, some yellow and others black and blue. The bridge of her nose was broken, and there were rashes and burns all over her arms and legs. Ligature marks were visible on her wrists and ankles. She had lost a little over 10 pounds, a significant amount given she only weighed 105 pounds when she went missing. But the most horrific injury was on her right shoulder. Burnt into her flesh were a series of undistinguishable letters, some scabbed and others already scarred. Sherri had been branded. When Keith Papini arrived at the hospital, it was a teary reunion for the couple. They hugged each other tightly for 20 minutes as Keith was overcome with conflicting emotions. Relief that Sherri had been found alive, and revulsion that someone could do something so horrible. Sherri was clearly traumatised and refused to speak to the police. She told Keith that law enforcement had been involved in her abduction, and she therefore didn't trust anyone. Instead, investigators gave Keith an audio recorder so that he could ask her questions himself. According to Sherri, she'd been jogging the old Oregon Trail when a dark-coloured SUV drove by, and then backed up again. 2 Hispanic women were inside. One of them beckoned her over, saying they needed help with something. Sherri approached the vehicle, but as she got closer, one of the women held up a small gun. She demanded that Sherri drop her phone and get into the car, reassuring her, "We don't want to kill you." Thinking quickly as she removed her headphones, Sherri purposely pulled out several strands of her hair to leave behind as a clue. Sherri got into the vehicle and the women put something over her head. One of them struck her with something. Sherri thought it might have been a taser. From there, everything went hazy. She tried to stay awake but kept losing consciousness. The next thing she knew, she woke up in a strange room that had its windows boarded up from the inside. There was nothing in the room except for a bed, a dresser, and a closet. All of her clothes were gone, and she'd been redressed in a plain t-shirt. Sherri stood on the bed and tried to look out the window, only to discover it had also been boarded up from the outside. She attempted to dislodge one of the boards, but the two women came in and caught her in the act. They yanked her down by her hair and hit her so hard that she saw stars. When Sherri came to, the dresser was gone and the bed was in its place. A chain had been tied around her waist, which was bolted to the ceiling and hooked to a metal pole in the closet. Over the coming days, the two women came and went from the room. Sherri was mostly kept locked in the closet. She was given a bucket full of kitty litter to use as a toilet and fed once daily with small portions of bread, gritty rice, porridge, and the occasional apple or fat off a piece of meat. Outside her door, a speaker blasted what Sherri described as, quote, that really annoying Mexican music a majority of the time. The two women yelled at her in Spanish, which Sherri didn't understand, and the older of the two occasionally beat her. Anytime Sherri made a sound, she was physically punished. She was sometimes burned with heated-up kitchen utensils. When she accidentally made a clanging noise with her chain, one of the women rushed in and cut off her ponytail, threatening, "I'm going to send it to your mother." Sherri wasn't particularly close with her mother, so this comment led her to believe that her captors didn't know her and had taken her at random. When Sherri questioned why they were doing this, one of them said, "We sell you." The other added, "Your buyer is a cop." The women read Sherri news articles about her disappearance. One of them laughed as she said, "No one believes you. Everyone thinks you ran away. Guess what? The buyer's a cop. They're never gonna find you." Sherri had no idea what to do. She tried to engage with her captors by offering to cook or clean for them in the hopes they would give her more information. But the women remained tight-lipped. With Sherri's limited knowledge of Spanish words, she thought she heard mention of traffic, cameras, medicine, and a delivery date. Fearful of what that signified, she began making plans to escape. At one point, Sherri's captors forced her into the shower at gunpoint and told her to wash herself. As Sherri lathered herself with coconut-scented body wash, the women became engaged in a conversation and lowered their guns. Recognizing this as an opportunity, Sherri jumped on the younger woman and smashed her head into the toilet. She slipped and cut her foot in the process. The older woman dragged Sherri back to her room by her hair, forcing an unknown substance down her throat. When Sherri made another attempt to escape, the women tied her to a table and slashed her t-shirt off from behind. Already in agony from her healing breast implants, that's when the women branded her. Sherri's captors told her this is what her buyer wanted. Along with the immense pain, Sherri heard her skin make a sizzling, popping sound. Too scared to make a noise, she kept her eyes clenched shut until it was over. While it was unclear what the word said, Sherri believed it said Exodus, which she described as a really confusing Bible passage. To maintain her strength and sanity, Sherri spent some of her spare time doing yoga. She scratched away at the drywall inside the closet in the hopes she might chip a big enough hole to escape. She thought about her children constantly. Over time, Sherri sensed that the younger of her captors was starting to soften. Sometimes when the older woman beat Sherri, the younger one would drag her off. Then one day, Sherri was sitting on the bed when she heard a gunshot. Terrified, she hid in the closet. It sounded like someone was gathering up keys to leave the house. Then came the blasting mariachi music. Sherri started screaming and yanking on her chains until she eventually fell asleep. When she woke up, the younger of her captors came in and gave her a plate of food. Sherri ate it, but soon started to feel nauseous and dizzy. She could barely stand. The younger captor came back in and hit Sherri in the face. She had laid a fresh sweatsuit out on the bed and insinuated that Sherri get dressed into it. Sherri did so, after which the woman hit her again and placed something over her head so that she couldn't see. Sherri was then led outside and into a vehicle. Sharp restraints were secured around her ankles and wrists, one of which was secured to the vehicle. Sherri didn't know who else was in the car. There were no voices, only the sound of the radio. Sherri tried to keep track of how far they drove by counting the number of songs, but she kept falling asleep. Eventually, the car stopped. The younger captor ordered Sherri to get out. Sherri was terrified. She started crying. The woman cut her restraints, pushed her out the door, and drove off. Sherri removed her head covering, realizing it was a pillowcase. She looked around at her rural surroundings and had no idea where she was. She began to run. Eventually, she came to a building, but it was locked, so she started running down the dark highway, waving the pillowcase and screaming at the top of her lungs. She screamed so hard that she could taste blood in the back of her throat. Car after car sped past without stopping. Sherri wondered if they could see her restraints and were deterred from stopping because they thought she was an escaped prisoner. She tried to hide them under her clothes until a trucker eventually stopped. Safe in hospital with her husband, Sherri was thoroughly examined. She was adamant that she hadn't endured any form of sexual assault. This was supported by medical exams. Toxicology tests came up clean for narcotics, ruling out the possibility that Sherri had been drugged. Her clothing was sent off for DNA testing. On Thanksgiving afternoon, members of the Redding community gathered in Sherri's honour as planned, unaware that she'd been found alive. When the good news was revealed a few hours later, Sherri's sister Sheila thanked their supporters, saying, "Everyone's tireless efforts have made our family whole again this Thanksgiving." News of Sherri's escape gripped the nation. The public were hungry for details, but the Papini family requested privacy during this time of healing. Over the coming days, investigators gently probed Sherri for any more details she could remember that might help them catch her abductors. While Sherri tried to keep things light-hearted, her trauma was obvious. She hugged her knees to her chest, her eyes mostly cast downward, as she did her best to provide every possible piece of information. The two women had worn masks over the bottom halves of their faces, so Sherri never got a complete look at them, but she remembered other details. The older of the pair had long, straight dark hair that was showing signs of greying. She had dark eyes and thick, bushy eyebrows. She was roughly 3 inches taller than Sherri, heavy-set, and spoke with a raspy voice. Her breath smelt like sweetened coffee. The younger woman had dark curly hair that had been smoothed with product, thin, over-tweezed eyebrows, and wore large hoop earrings. She was a bit shorter than Sherri, with a slightly muscular build and hairy arms. Sherri struggled to recall details about the clothing either of the women had been wearing, other than the fact they always wore leather gloves. The pair fought often, and Sherri regularly overheard the older woman hit the younger one. As for the location where she was held, Sherri had no idea. She sometimes heard birds outside, but because of the speaker outside her door, she never heard anything else. It was always cold, possibly raining every night, and she could smell a fireplace. Anytime she made a noise, her captors came in and took her blankets away as punishment. The bathroom had a unique layout which Sherri was able to describe in detail, right down to a crack in the shower tile. She never saw the outside of the building. To maintain the integrity of the investigation, police made the strategic decision to withhold details about Sherri's time in captivity, including the branding. But this silence led to speculation from cynics that the whole kidnapping had been a hoax. If the police were so vocal about seeking answers when Sherri went missing, why go quiet when she was returned safely? Was it possible the whole thing had been a publicity stunt by Cameron Gamble, the hostage negotiator, after all? Or perhaps Keith and Sherri had crafted the elaborate plot for financial gain and fame? Investigators had considered this possibility, but unless they had evidence to prove otherwise, they had no reason to treat the abduction as anything other than a legitimate crime. It was a lesson learned the hard way by Vallejo police, just 180 miles south of Redding. The year before Sherri Papini's abduction, a Vallejo man named Aaron Quinn called police to report a home invasion. He claimed that a gunman had broken into his home and forced him and his girlfriend, Denise Huskins, to drink tea laced with sleeping pills. They were blindfolded and tied up in the closet, where the gunman played a pre-recorded message. It explained that the couple had been targeted by a criminal group who were going to hold Denise captive, unless Aaron paid an $8,500 ransom within 48 hours. When Aaron woke up hours later, Denise was gone. He reported the incident to police, but the story was so outlandish that they thought he was making it up. When Denise resurfaced 2 days later, claiming to have been held captive and raped, both law enforcement and the media palmed it off as a wild hoax. 3 months later, police were investigating an unrelated home invasion when they uncovered evidence linking the perpetrator to Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn. It turned out the couple had been telling the truth. The perpetrator, a disbarred attorney named Matthew Muller, was tried and sentenced to 31 years in prison. Vallejo police were forced to publicly apologise to Denise and Aaron, who were awarded a $2.5 million compensation payout. Investigators in the Sherri Papini case were determined not to make a similar mistake. Keith Papini released an exclusive statement to national news program Good Morning America to address the rumours surrounding his wife's case head-on. He acknowledged the, quote, double-edged sword that is social media. While modern technology had allowed news of Sherri's disappearance to spread quickly, those same people who helped spread the word now expected answers instantly and became angry when they didn't get the gory details. Keith said, "Those people should be ashamed of their malicious, subhuman behaviour. We are not going to allow those people to take away our spirit, love or rejoice in our girl found alive and home where she belongs. I do not see a purpose in addressing each preposterous lie. Instead, may I give you a glimpse of the mixture of horror and elation that was my experience of reuniting with the love of my life and mother of our children." Keith went on to provide a harrowing account of Sherri's ordeal, complete with the details of her injuries, including the branding. He remarked, "Nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see upon my arrival at the hospital, nor the details of the true hell I was about to hear." Acknowledging the tireless support of law enforcement and the public, Keith said, "Thank you to the many incredible humans that have never known Sherri that facilitated in sharing our heartbreak across the globe. Sherri has always captured my heart, and it is no surprise that she has captured hearts not only through the country, but throughout the world." The following day, police held a press conference to acknowledge Sherri Papini's courage. They released brief details about her two captors and appealed for anyone with information to come forward. The fact that Sherri had overheard the perpetrators talking about a buyer and getting paid gave weight to the human trafficking theory. Maybe the women had kidnapped Sherri at random, thinking she was much younger. When they realised she was a 34-year-old mother, they didn't know how to proceed, hence why they held her captive for so long and were constantly bickering. But if this was the case, it would be highly unusual. In the United States, white women are rarely abducted for sex trafficking. Victims usually know their exploiters, who are often tricked into willingly going with them after being promised a better life. Perpetrators involved are typically professionals. It would be highly unusual for someone involved in trafficking to let a victim go, as it risked exposing the entire ring. The fact that Sherri was branded also raised questions. Some believed this type of torture was typical for traffickers who wanted to maintain control over their victim, while others questioned why a sex trafficker would want to taint their own product. Based on the description that Sherri had provided of her time in captivity, investigators began working on the theory that she had been held somewhere in the mountains. They obtained cell phone data from the area where Sherri was abducted and the area where she was found, on the lookout for any numbers that pinged off phone towers at both locations. As reported by the Sacramento Bee, 6 numbers came up. Among them was a 21-year-old woman. Police visited her home, discovering that she had dark hair like Sherri's young captor, but she wasn't Latina and had an alibi for the abduction period. Tip-offs continued to come in from the public. One woman reported having seen a pair of Latina women who matched the suspect descriptions in a Walmart store. They were looking at her and whispering. The caller had blonde hair similar to Sherri Papini. She was scared that she might be next. By December 3, Sherri Papini had been home for a week and a half. Hundreds of Reading locals gathered to celebrate her safe return and stand in solidarity with their community. Wearing pink in Sherri's honour, they posed for a photograph underneath a large pink banner that read, "Welcome home." Despite this warm response, Sherri struggled in the aftermath of her abduction. While her physical injuries eventually healed, the emotional scars remained. She became afraid of people, particularly strangers, and wanted Keith by her side at all times. Neighbours noted that she rarely left the house and her children hardly ever played out in the yard. Sherri began extensive therapy to treat post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety. She met with investigators from time to time and officers checked in on the Papinis weekly. But Sherri's recollection of the events became hazy and she was unable to provide any new insights. The search for her abductors continued, but police failed to come up with any solid leads. A year went by with no major breakthroughs. To mark the upcoming anniversary, a police artist worked with Sherri to create composite sketches of her two captors, bandanas covering the bottom half of their faces. These were released to the public, along with the first detailed account of Sherri's experience in captivity. Keith Papini released a statement on his family's behalf, thanking their supporters and requesting privacy, as his wife continued to heal and they focused on putting their lives back together. But for all the support, Sherri still had her fair share of critics. Following her safe return, an online blog post had surfaced from 2007 that had some people asking questions. The post had originally appeared on a white supremacy website called skinheads.com. It detailed the author's adolescent years, during which her high school experience suffered because she was, quote, defending myself against the Latinos. The chief problem was that I was drug-free, white, and proud of my blood and heritage. This really irked a group of Latino girls who would constantly rag and attack me. The author detailed an incident at one of her volleyball games. One of the Latina girls had apparently called her dad a Nazi, which enraged the teen and provoked her to launch an attack. It took 3 full-grown men to pull her off. By then, she had broken the nose of one of her tormentors. The author used this event to explain why girls shouldn't fight, stating, "We are just too fragile and break easily." She spoke proudly of her German heritage, concluding, "Being white is more than just being aware of my skin, but of standing behind skinheads who are always around, in spirit as well, and having pride for my country." The author was credited as Sherri Graff, Sherri Papini's maiden name. An old account on social network site Pinterest also surfaced that was attributed to a user named Sherri Papini. The user had posted several images with pro-white and racist undertones. Sherri's critics immediately started speculating that she had made up the story of her kidnapping to ignite a race war. Latinos only made up 10% of Shasta County's population, and since Sherri's kidnapping, the minority group had faced ongoing scrutiny. According to the Sacramento Bee, local women of Latin American descent were advised not to go out in pairs, avoid driving dark-coloured SUVs, and avoid going out in public unless they had a witness. Sherri's loved ones firmly denied the allegations that she had written the blog post. Sherri had been briefly married in 2007. Her ex-husband, with whom she had an amicable divorce, told reporters that Sherri wasn't racist and had a very diverse group of friends. He said the blog had been maliciously written by someone who hated Sherri in high school, and that she had unsuccessfully attempted to have it removed at the time. When questioned by investigators, Sherri described the blog post as awful. She confirmed that she'd hired a lawyer to try and have it taken down. Investigators looked into the claims that Sherri had written the post herself, but were unable to ascertain its true origin. Regardless of who wrote it, they confirmed too much time had passed for it to be of any relevance to Sherri's current kidnapping case. Police openly acknowledged that there were puzzling details about Sherri's abduction, but stated they had no reason to doubt Sherri's story. On the 1-year anniversary of the abduction, one of the lead investigators told People magazine, "There is no information that would indicate it's not true. I have invested almost a year of my career in this case, and we will continue on until we get some answers, and hopefully get some people in custody soon." Casefile will be back shortly. Thank you for supporting us by listening to this episode's sponsors. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Getting to know yourself can be a lifelong process, especially because we're always growing and changing. Things that happen to us, whether good or bad, change who we are. Therapy is all about deepening your self-awareness and understanding. Because sometimes we don't know what we want or why we react the way we do until we talk through things. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. At Casefile, we know how important it is to look after our mental health. Even when we're feeling great, we have found therapy to be so beneficial in goal setting and planning for our futures. We also love that BetterHelp is entirely online. We can find time to talk to a therapist that fits with our schedule and can do so from the comfort of our homes. To get started, all you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire and you'll be matched with a licensed therapist. And you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/casefile today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/casefile.
Have you tried new Splenda Peel and Pour zero-calorie drink mix? Liquid drink mix in a pod. Simple to peel, pour, and serve. 4 delicious flavors the whole family will love. Fruit punch, pink lemonade, sweet tea, and peach mango. Splenda Peel and Pour drink mix has 0 sugar, 0 calories, and the pre-measured liquid means no waiting for messy powder to dissolve. Makes the perfect pitcher every time. Find new Splenda Peel and Pour in the drink mix aisle at your favorite grocery store.
Thank you for listening to this episode's ads. By supporting our sponsors, you support Casefile to continue to deliver quality content. For investigators behind closed doors, unanswered questions were stacking up. For starters, a motive still hadn't been established. Sherri Papini's captors had never demanded a ransom, and there was no conclusive evidence to support the human trafficking theory. So why had this unassuming mother been targeted? Her abductors were seemingly part of a wider network, but there had been no other recent crimes that fit the same bill. It therefore seemed strange that they hadn't struck again elsewhere. Over time, other small inconsistencies had started to mount. Sherri had told investigators that she had cut her foot during an altercation with her younger captor. Yet, there had been no evidence of such a cut when she was first taken to hospital. She'd also given conflicting accounts of when the branding had happened, first saying it had happened early on, and then changing her story and saying it happened later. Sherri had initially told investigators that she was forced to wear an adult diaper, but never mentioned this detail again. Sherri said that when she first woke up in captivity, her hands had been tied behind her back with zip ties. She explained that she'd managed to chew through the bindings, but had never explained how she managed to get her hands from behind her back. While investigators knew it was entirely possible that Sherri's memory had been distorted by trauma, the inconsistencies raised some major red flags. Perhaps most perplexing was the fact that when Sherri was found safe, her clothing was sent off for DNA testing. Traces of unknown male DNA was found on both her underwear and sweatpants, but there was no female DNA. Investigators ran the profile through the National CODIS database, in which DNA profiles from crime scenes and known offenders are stored. There were no matches. But if Sherri had been taken by 2 women with no one else involved, this didn't explain the DNA discrepancy. Investigators learned early on that Sherri had a history of lying. Several of Sherri's friends had described her as a crazy and wild youth who often ran away and made up stories, including that she suffered from a heart condition. An ex-boyfriend described her as attention-hungry. He said Sherri fabricated stories of being abused by her family and even accused him of abuse once their relationship ended. The director of a youth program that Sherri had once participated in said that Sherri was, quote, good at creating different realities for people so that they would see what she wanted them to see, which got her really good attention. Sherri's first marriage had been one of convenience. Her first husband was in the military and had agreed to marry Sherri so she could take advantage of his health insurance. While Sherri had told her second husband, Keith, this was due to a heart murmur, she had told her first husband it was due to complications from regular egg donation. Sherri had also told her first husband that her family was abusive. It was only after their divorce that mutual friends warned him that she had a history of lying. Investigations conducted by the Sacramento Bee newspaper revealed that in 2003, Sherri's mother, Loretta, had called the local sheriff's department to lodge an incident report. Loretta claimed that her daughter was harming herself and then blaming the injuries on Loretta. A deputy had provided Loretta with advice, but no further action was taken. This wasn't the only time a member of Sherri's family had reported her to the police. In 2000, Sherri's father, Richard, accused her of burglarizing his home. That same year, Sherri's sister, Sheila, had her back door vandalized. When she reported it to the police, she named Sherri as a suspect. 3 years later, Richard alleged that Sherri stole money from his checking account. Although investigators had been aware of these issues, it didn't prove that Sherri was lying about her kidnapping. The hunt to find her abductors continued, but the years passed by with no arrests. By 2020, the case had long faded from the headlines, but it hadn't been forgotten by the Redding community, who still wanted answers. Skepticism remained rife, while fears that kidnappers were on the loose continued to haunt locals, some of whom had been too scared to let their young daughters walk alone ever since Sherri's attack. Sherri continued to work intermittently with the police. Whenever she remembered something new that could help with the investigation, she or her husband would call to make a report. Sherri looked online to find photos of anything that shared similarities to details from her abduction, from the hairlines of her kidnappers to the coffee table she was tied to during her branding. On August 13, 2020, Sherri and Keith Papini met with 2 detectives from the Shasta County Sheriff's Department who had been working the case from the beginning. They had some photos of potential suspects they wanted to show Sherri. She studied them carefully, looking at them from different angles and honing in on small features.
I'm trying not to get my hopes up. I know. I would say right here is what's drawing me to this photo.
So on photo number 5,
Yeah.
Marty, this is the first one we showed you. The second one we showed you. So on 6-bet number 2,
But like you were saying, if someone were to lose weight, that would change.
you're drawn to photo number 5?
Yes,
Features of photo number 5?
correct.
And again, just for the record and for when you go back, like number 1 is when you say 3 is similar, she's similar to the younger female that we've always described in everything.
This part right here doesn't really match what I'm remembering, but
The
yeah.
hairline doesn't match?
Smaller one, older one.
And just because it's been a long time, can you remind me what the younger one did, like the main parts of it compared to the older one, just for the last, like, clarity of stuff? So for the record, so.
The younger one's the one that let me go
Okay.
and was the nicer of the 2.
Okay.
The older one was really abusive and really mean, and is the one that did all the really terrible things.
Okay.
The detectives then showed Sherri some photos of coffee tables similar to the ones she had described. Focusing on one of them, Sherri enthusiastically exclaimed, "Excuse my language, but it's pretty fucking similar."
You said it looks very similar. What's
I mean,
similar?
this is what I'm remembering, that feeling, you know, grabbing it and feeling that feeling. But this part is different. This part is different. That definitely
So you're
doesn't
saying
look
this
the
metal
same.
part, it looks the same as what you remember, but this piece right here,
This part doesn't look the same, right?
and what was the difference in it?
That there was a lot more. There was a lot more there.
Like bulkier?
Yes, thank you.
I don't think the pictures really show.
Sherri had always described her captor's bathroom as having a unique layout. The detectives showed her some photos of bathrooms with similar designs to the one she'd described. Sherri acknowledged the layouts were similar, but that was all. She'd previously said there was a crack in the shower tile. Shown a photo of a shower with a crack in it, Sherri couldn't say whether it was the same one. After all these years, she was struggling to remember. The detectives made it clear they weren't trying to overwhelm Sherri. There was actually a good reason for the probing. They had found the house that Sherri was held in, and they knew who was responsible. Keith Papini was elated. He pumped his fists in the air and rubbed his hands together in glee. But Sherri's reaction was surprising. She became strangely defensive. Over the years, investigators had continued to run checks on the DNA found on Sherri's clothing in case someone new had entered the CODIS database during that time. No matches were ever made. Then came the rise of genealogy testing, where users voluntarily submitted DNA to trace their family trees. In 2018, familial DNA had led to the apprehension of the notorious Golden State Killer, as covered in episode 53 of Casefile. Investigators wondered whether the same technique could be applied to identify Sherri Papini's captors. In March 2020, they ran the DNA from Sherri's clothing through an Ancestry DNA database. This time, there was a match. The DNA in the database belonged to an individual who had 2 biological sons. One of those was James Reyes, a man in his mid-30s who lived in the Californian city of Costa Mesa, 585 miles south of Redding. Reyes appeared to be a law-abiding citizen. A check of his background revealed no major criminal record, save for a drunk driving charge. But, as police dug further, they discovered some interesting details. James Reyes had once shared an email account with Sherri Papini. In the past, the two had made joint financial transactions. Furthermore, Reyes had once listed his address as a residence owned by Sherri's parents. Investigators searched through social media. On an account owned by James Reyes's brother, they found a picture of a coffee table that looked exactly like the one Sherri had described being tied to while she was branded. They went to Costa Mesa and kept a covert eye on Reyes's property. After seeing him discard some trash, they retrieved a bottle of iced tea and sent it to the lab for testing. There was no doubt about it. The DNA on Sherri Papini's clothing had come from James Reyes. Two detectives knocked on Reyes's door and asked him a few questions about himself and his relationship with Sherri Papini. A former professional hockey player, Reyes had recently quit his job at an ice skating rink to take care of his aging grandmother. He met Sherri through a youth group as a teenager. In late 2002, the two reconnected and started dating. They were together for several years and lived together in Costa Mesa, but the relationship eventually crumbled. They ended things on good terms and stayed in vague contact for a few years, but Reyes said he hadn't seen Sherri in around a decade. All he knew about her abduction was whatever was reported on in the media. The detectives cut to the chase. They told Reyes his DNA had been found on Sherri's clothing the day she escaped her captors. Reyes seemed perplexed. He maintained the two hadn't seen one another since around mid-2006. He had no explanation for how his DNA could have gotten on Sherri's clothes. Asked point blank if he was involved in Sherri's abduction, Reyes said no. The investigators reiterated that there was no way his DNA could have gotten on her clothing if they hadn't been in contact. They gave him several opportunities to change his story, reminding him it was a crime to lie to law enforcement, but Reyes maintained he had nothing to do with the abduction. After almost an hour of questioning, Reyes cracked. "I didn't kidnap her," he said. "A friend in need asked me for help." According to James Reyes, he was cleaning out his house in 2015 when he came across some of Sherri's old belongings. He sent them to her parents' house. Not long after that, Sherri contacted him out of the blue. She needed his help. She said her husband had been beating and raping her and she didn't know what to do. She'd reported the abuse to police, but her husband had connections with law enforcement and nothing had been done. At a loss, Sherri told Reyes she'd hatched a plan. She was saving money and was going to run away to stay with him. Reyes was taken aback, but more than willing to help a friend in need. Sherri asked him to get a prepaid burner phone so they could speak without fear of her husband finding out. The two maintained regular contact from that point on. In the summer of 2016, Sherri gave Reyes a set of instructions: rent a car and to drive to Reading to pick her up. Tell no one. James Reyes's drink driving charge prohibited him from renting a car. Instead, he organised a co-worker to hire one for him. It was a Dodge Challenger sports car, not an SUV as Sherri had described her kidnappers as using. On November 2, 2016, Reyes set out on the 9-hour drive. When he got to Reading, Sherri texted directions on where to pick her up near Old Oregon Trail. When Reyes got there, Sherri was wearing jogging clothes and sweating. She jumped into the back seat and laid low. Reyes didn't see what she did with her phone. The two drove back to Costa Mesa, rarely stopping except for gas. Sherri laid down and napped for the entire journey, while Reyes struggled to keep his eyes open after so many hours behind the wheel. Reyes lived in a suburban neighbourhood in Costa Mesa. Once they were at Reyes's apartment, he claimed they both did their own thing. Reyes went about his normal routine, going to work each day and sometimes playing hockey at night. He slept on the couch while Sherri took his bedroom. He left Sherri to her own devices, assuming she was doing whatever she felt necessary to deal with her situation. Reyes claimed he had no input in any of Sherri's plans. He simply went along with whatever she told him to do. He bought her new clothes, cleaning supplies, food, and chains. He boarded up the window. At no point did Sherri leave the house, nor did anyone else come over. Reyes did confide in his cousin that Sherri was there, explaining that he was helping protect her. But all this didn't explain Sherri's extensive injuries. When asked about those, Reyes responded, "She did all that while she was here." Reyes claimed that Sherri hit herself to create bruises and that at her request, he agreed to help. While he never outright touched Sherri, Reyes admitted to hitting hockey pucks at her. At one point, he held up a hockey stick so that Sherri could purposely run into it, breaking her nose in the process. Sherri cut her own hair and limited her food intake. She told Reyes to visit the local hobby store and purchase a wood-burning tool. She willingly removed her shirt and sat down with her back to Reyes, handing him individual letters that she wanted burned into her skin. He didn't know what the word meant or why she had chosen it. All he knew was that it was a Bible verse. Reyes didn't own a TV, so he didn't know the full extent of the media coverage Sherri's disappearance was receiving. The detectives asked if he kept any kind of insurance, something that would prove his story if Sherri had been found in his home, and denied that it was all consensual. Reyes said he hadn't felt the need to. While he didn't know what Sherri's intentions were for when the whole situation was over, he thought there was a chance they might end up together in the end. This wasn't a motivator to Reyes either way, as he wasn't really in a place to start a romantic relationship. Regardless, Reyes said that nothing remotely sexual occurred between the two. Eventually, Sherri said she missed her children and wanted to go home. Reyes had his co-worker hire him another car. In the early hours of Thanksgiving morning, Sherri gathered up a pillowcase of items, including chains. The pair drove to Yolo County, where Reyes dropped Sherri off on the side of the road. From there, he returned home to retrieve his car, then continued to his aunt's house for Thanksgiving lunch. He hadn't spoken to Sherri since. Reyes admitted he'd looked Sherri's case up from time to time. He didn't know what possessed her to blame the abduction on two fictional Hispanic women. He had considered whether he'd get in trouble, but justified his involvement to the detectives. Quote, "When it comes down to it, I was doing an old friend a favour." When investigators saw James Reyes's bedroom, it was exactly as Sherri had described. The only difference was that there was no chain in the closet. They questioned Reyes's cousin and his wife, who confirmed that Sherri had willingly stayed with Reyes during her so-called time in captivity. Blonde hairs found in his bedroom were tested for DNA and confirmed to have come from Sherri Papini. Other data, including car rental records and cell phone data, also confirmed James Reyes's version of events. He agreed to a polygraph test and passed. Friends of Reyes told detectives that he was the nicest guy alive, to a fault. Armed with this information, the detectives repeatedly reminded Sherri it was a crime to lie to federal agents. When they told her they'd identified the house where she'd been held captive, she was visibly caught off guard. She seemed reluctant to receive the information, which confused her husband Keith. The detectives told Sherri they'd found DNA and uncovered several inconsistencies in her story. Still, Sherri seemed perplexed. She asked to have a moment alone to speak to her husband. Alone, Sherri and Keith began speaking in whispers. Sherri explained the reason she is hesitant to have her captor's identity revealed was because she didn't want the younger woman to be arrested.
I don't know. I don't want them to find her. You're not listening to me.
But tell me why.
Because she saved my life.
But tell me, there's obviously something going on. There's obviously something going on. This is going to be really bad if you don't tell me.
Look at how you're being right now. I am fucking with you.
I'm not with me.
Babe, I don't want them to find her. I don't want to press charges, and I don't want to go down that road.
But you tell her.
I don't want to go down that road. I don't
Tell
want
me
to
why.
arrest her. Because she saved my life, and she's the reason why I get to hold my children every single day.
And this you don't want to get it.
When the detectives came back into the room, Sherri admitted that she didn't want the younger of her captors to be punished. It was clear that she wasn't going to budge from her version of events. Detectives gave it to her straight, saying, The DNA that was on you belongs to James Reyes.
In this situation, the reason why you can describe the room is because you stayed in the room in the dark for hours, for days on end. The reason why you lost so much weight is because you stopped eating. The reason why you got a rash on your arm is because you cleaned his house. The reason why the brand is because he went to the store, bought the branding tools, and branded you. The reason why your nose was broke is because of a hockey stick. I know all of those things, and I know there was no sex. I know all of that because he passed a polygraph test. That said, it's not an abduction. She asked me to come get her.
No.
I rented a car.
No.
I drove up and picked her up. He passed the polygraph test, Sherri.
If that's not what happened, what did happen, Sherri?
I don't know. No, there's no way. It's James. There's no way. There's no
The
way.
DNA doesn't lie.
His DNA,
His DNA was on you.
his
There's
brother,
no way.
Robert saw you in the house while you were down there. While everything
Who's
spun out
Robert?
of control, his cousin. Why everything ran out of control on the initial.
There's no way.
It's 100% Robert's or James's DNA.
You even collected blonde hairs from the room.
There's no way it's James. There's no way.
Tell me that it is.
Why are you saying it's not James? Why are you saying it's not?
He loved me.
What's up?
We were friends.
Mhm.
There's no way.
And he came and got you because you asked him.
No.
When was the last time you had contact with James?
Sherri sat with her head in her hands, sobbing. Confronted with the truth about how she received her injuries, she acted confused. She said she hadn't seen James Reyes in over 10 years. Confronted again and again with evidence, Sherri continued to play dumb. The detectives asked Keith to leave the room. Alone with Sherri, they asked her whether she was trying to escape an abusive marriage or teach Keith a lesson. Sherri sobbed even harder. She tearfully admitted to speaking with other men when she shouldn't have. "Why would I do that?" she sobbed, almost incoherently. "I don't want to leave my husband. I love my husband." The detectives made it very clear that James Reyes had confessed to his part in the whole ordeal. They gave Sherri numerous opportunities to come clean, letting her know they couldn't help her if she continued to lie.
Nobody else. He got nothing out of this.
And you're welcome to go home, Sherri. But right now is your opportunity to tell us the truth. And
Can't be.
are you saying that it was two females that picked you up? What's that? Every time I ask that question, it seems like you don't answer it.
This can't be happening to me.
You sat in a room, you drew out two people in a sketch, Sherri. Are
Wait,
those two people the ones that took you? It's a yes or no.
I don't know.
Well, you were pretty clear when I asked you earlier, what did the younger one do? You said the younger one pointed a gun at you.
She was there.
She wasn't. It was just James.
Not me.
James was
We-
2 hours late.
We have the rental records from 2016 for the vehicle that he used.
Why?
Because we went and looked for it because he told me.
Because I was talking to him.
That's clear. You were talking to him. I don't.
This is my fault because I was talking to him. This can't.
We have to control what we can control.
No.
We're to the point, the younger female that you've always described, is she the one that pointed a gun at you? Is that true or not?
Oh no.
You do know, you told me earlier. So earlier today, when we were talking, I asked you what did the younger one do? You told me the younger one pointed a gun at you and let you go. That's what you said.
She let me go.
And You let yourself go. You let yourself out of the backseat. Never even said bye to James. Never a thank you, never a nothing. Just an out.
No.
Yeah, that's what James told me. Until you can start telling me that James is a liar and start pointing things out, James passed a polygraph.
This is my fault that I was fucking James. It's my fault that I was flirting with other men. It was such a stupid thing to do. I love my husband.
Flirting with
I love
other-
my children.
That's understandable.
It's just stupid for
Here's the deal though,
flirting with other
Sherri.
men.
Flirting with other men, not a crime. Lying to me today, yes, a crime.
When asked if a female pointed a gun at her, Sherri said she couldn't remember. She said she refused to get anyone in trouble, crying, "I know you know who she is." The detectives told Sherri that at this point, the only person who was going to get in trouble was her. Sherri responded tearfully, "I didn't do anything wrong. I don't understand. There's no way that it's James." With no admission, Sherri was free to go home. Investigators continued building their case against her for a year and a half. It was determined that all up, law enforcement spent more than $150,000 in resources investigating Sherri's so-called abduction. Concerned community members who rallied behind the Papinis had raised $49,000 in a GoFundMe account. The Papinis used this money to fund a private investigator, pay off credit card debt, and other personal expenses. In total, Sherri had received a little over $30,500 from the California Victim Compensation Board, which had been spent on therapy, ambulances, and blackout blinds. She also received $127,000 in disability benefits. By early March 2020, over 5 years had passed since Sherri Papini went through with the hoax. She was attending a piano lesson with her 2 children when a man burst in and said her car outside had been hit. It was all a lure by detectives. As soon as Sherri walked out, she was placed under arrest. Given that she'd received some of the compensation payments via US Postal Service, she was charged with mail fraud, as well as making false statements. A spokesperson for the Shasta County Sheriff's Department made a post on Facebook that read, "Today is a great day for the Shasta County Sheriff's Office and for all law enforcement in this county. Not only did this charade take valuable resources away from real criminal investigative matters, but in a time where there are serious human trafficking cases with legitimate victims, Sherri Papini used this tragic societal phenomenon to gain notoriety and financial gain." James Reyes was never charged for his involvement in the so-called abduction. If found guilty, Sherri Papini faced a possible 25 years in prison. In mid-April, she pleaded guilty to the charges in the hopes of receiving a lesser sentence. Her defense team blamed Sherri's actions on a painful upbringing and, quote, chameleonic personalities, which they said drove her to simultaneously crave family security and the freedom of youth. They said she inflicted the injuries on herself as penance, and her lies spiraled out of control when she realized what she'd done. The defense argued for 1 month in prison followed by 7 months of home detention, stating, "It is hard to imagine a more brutal public revelation of a person's broken inner self. At this point, the punishment is already intense and feels like a life sentence." The prosecution debated this, stating, "Papini's planning of her hoax kidnapping was meticulous and began months in advance. It was not merely the reaction to a traumatic childhood." They said it was important to acknowledge that, quote, An entire community believed the hoax and lived in fear that Hispanic women were roving the streets to abduct and sell women. Ultimately, Sherri Papini was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay restitution of just over $300,000. She admitted to the lies but offered no explanation for her actions, telling the judge, "What is done cannot be undone. It cannot be erased. I'm sorry, Your Honour. I'm sad. I feel very sad." Keith Papini had always stood by Sherri's side. His unfaltering loyalty had seen him and his children be the victims of hate mail and threats. But as soon as the truth about Sherri's part in the kidnapping hoax came to light, Keith filed for divorce. He applied for full custody of the children, releasing one final public statement that said, "The events of the past 2 months have been shocking and devastating. My current focus is on moving on and doing everything I can to provide my 2 children with as normal, healthy, and happy of a life as possible." Sherri didn't admit the truth about her lies to her family until the day before she pleaded guilty in court. In a Facebook post following Sherri's sentencing, her sister Sheila wrote, "That Sherri could intentionally mislead her own beautiful children, her devoted husband, Keith, our families, the authorities, and all of you for so long is beyond comprehension, and was done for reasons for which only she is aware. Sadly, despite what she has expressed to the media, she feels no remorse or guilt for the untold damage she has caused, nor for taking advantage of critical criminal, financial, and mental health resources that should have gone to help real victims in need. It deeply pains me to say this, but my sister is very disturbed, and I hope for her children's sake, once she is released, she will finally get the treatment she clearly so desperately needs." To this day, no one knows for sure what motivated Sherri Papini to stage such an elaborate hoax. Some believe she was a narcissist who craved attention, or that she wanted to be viewed as a hero. Others blame mental health issues, but various experts have struggled to come up with a diagnosis that would explain Sherri's actions. The fact that she was capable of planning and organising such a ruse ruled out various conditions. One forensic psychologist who studied the case said, "It is a mistake to assume mental illness is the cause of unusual behaviour." Regardless of Sherri's motivation, this wasn't a victimless crime. Financials aside, Sherri's actions had a detrimental impact on others. A spokesperson for the Shasta County Latino community told the Sacramento Bee that Sherri's false narrative deeply impacted Latina women who were unfairly treated with suspicion. They said, "This incident instilled that fear in people, and it didn't need to happen." As the sentencing judge stated, "This case is serious and there have been very real harms to society. Victims of crimes may not believe they will be believed by law enforcement because of this hoax. Sherri Papini is a manipulator. It's not as if she has seen the error of her ways. If she had not been caught, she'd still be living the lie." In June 1993, Elizabeth Stevens, 18, was murdered on her way home from the bus stop. Her death began a 7-week reign of terror for the people of Frankston.
I remember thinking, how can it happen to someone that's fought so hard to get away and have a good life?
A serial killer was on the loose. No one was safe. Not young mother Debbie Freem, 22, taken on a trip to the shops, nor Natalie Russell, 17, murdered on her way home from school.
Then 2 detectives came in and they just said to Brian and myself, "Can we go somewhere private?" And we went into the bedroom and they said, "I'm sorry to tell you, it's Natalie."
The serial killer, Paul Denyer, was captured and sentenced to life in prison. On appeal, he was granted a 30-year minimum sentence.
And I saw in his face that, yeah, I'm smarter than you sort of thing. He was proud of what he had done.
Fast forward 30 years, and Denyer has applied for parole. Award-winning crime writer Vicky Petratus was on patrol with police the night the final murder took place.
As a true crime author, I found myself right in the heart of Frankston, doing ride-alongs with the local police when the murders were happening.
She wrote the best-selling book, The Frankston Murders, which has never been out of print. Vicky has revisited the case in a long-form podcast to remind the world why Denyer must never be released.
Denyer isn't just dangerous where young women are concerned. He is dangerous to all women, babies, schoolgirls, friends, strangers, older women, everyone.
The Frankston Murders podcast uncovers new material and new victims stalked by Denyer in the lead-up to the killings.
The woman policeman turned to me and said, "You should take a ticket in tax," as much as to say I was the luckiest person around.
Vicky interviews prison guards, police officers, family members, and people caught in the periphery of a serial killer.
He has not learnt his lesson. He has not changed. He has not become remorseful. He has not repented or even apologised.
On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd easily put him as a 20. It's that far off the scale.
The Frankston Murders is the latest podcast from Casefile Presents, available now wherever you get your podcasts.
Have you tried new Splenda Peel and Pour 0-calorie drink mix? Liquid drink mix in a pod. Simple to peel, pour, and serve. 4 delicious flavors the whole family will love. Fruit punch, pink lemonade, sweet tea, and peach mango. Splenda Peel and Pour drink mix has 0 sugar, 0 calories, and the pre-measured liquid means no waiting for messy powder to dissolve. Makes the perfect pitcher every time. Find new Splenda Peel and Pour in the drink mix aisle at your favorite grocery store.
Happy birthday, baby! And you'll be even happier to know I bought all your gifts at BJ's Wholesale Club.
Oh, so smart! Batteries and muffins.
Wellesley Farms muffins.
And toilet paper.
Nice, right?
Jeff, is BJ's having a member favorite special again?
I may have seen a sign.
Save over $50 on BJ's member favorites from Wellesley Farms in Berkeley Jensen now through May 22nd. Check your app for coupons. BJ's. Absurdly simple savings.